All right, hi again, Honors 410. I really appreciate the discussion that's already started from yesterday's post that we put up. Looks like we're having some good, lively introductions and beginnings of kind of conversation around things like the Horse Girl trailer, as well as a number of other pieces of media that it sounds like a number of us have kind of engaged with in the past. Part of what I think is useful about talking about kind of what our recently consumed media are or what some of our favorites are, it just gives us some idea of kind of frames of reference. In a class like this where, we're not speaking as much about kind of, formal traditional literature, it's not kind of assumed that you have a foundation of, Nathaniel Hawthorne and J.D. Salinger and all of these kind of, classic, canonical authors. But it can be useful to have some common reference points in terms of media that we've consumed, in part because I would suggest a lot of what we'll be reading or watching in some ways either feeds into that tradition or riffs off of it in ways that I think are intended to be sort of surprising or subversive. And we'll get into all of that as we kind of move along in the session. But for today's class, I'm going to start off with some more kind of housekeeping items. I want to talk in a little bit more depth about two of the assignments that are going to hit us all sooner. Actually, maybe kind of three of the assignments, but one very briefly and the other two at a little bit more depth. And then we'll get into discussing the reading for today's class. First off, just as a quick thing, a couple students asked questions, and it's a very good question that I don't think I addressed as fully as I should have in the previous video lectures. For the reading response journals, every time that there is a reading due, you are welcome to submit a reading response journal in response to it. Again, you're expected to turn in 6 in order to earn full credit for that aspect of the course over the course of the summer session. And again, I do recommend doing it sooner than later. If you want to wait until the very end, I'm pretty flexible about accepting these journal responses, so I consider the final due date for all the journal responses to be the last day of class. That said, I think for your own benefit, just to, A, get it done while it's fresh in your mind, and B, so you can kind of collect your thoughts and kind of consider what you might want to put in the discussion thread, it's useful to do those journal responses sooner than later so they can help you in those ways. But so you can submit those, on a rolling basis. I grade them on a rolling basis, so it's not like I sit down at one time and grade all of them, but rather as I see them come up, as I have the time to do some grading, I tend to just give them a quick read over. And if I mark complete, that means you've earned full credit for it. Kind of no news is good news. I'll try to respond here and there if you bring a point that I think is kind of interesting or warrants a response. In some cases, especially as the session goes on and things get a little busier for all of us, I might just mark it as complete. Rest assured that doesn't mean that I was upset with you or that I didn't really read it or anything like that. It just means that I'm just giving you credit for it. But I didn't have additional deep thoughts that I wanted to add necessarily. On the flip side of that, though, if I feel like you're not meeting expectations for that aspect of the course, I will let you know about that. So I'll give you some comments that explain why I'm giving you an incomplete, or I might still give you a complete, but just say for future ones, this is more what I'm looking for. So please make sure that you just kind of transition in that direction for future entries. Okay, I hope that's clear enough about reading response journals. Again, no fixed due date. I do recommend trying to tend to them within a few days of when you do that reading, just again, for your own benefit, to kind of collect your thoughts, and while it's still fresh in your mind, you don't have to end up doing the reading twice to do your journal responses. And also, it's often easier for me to keep track of which reading you're talking about if they're coming in pretty quickly after the reading was due, so there's no confusion around that. Okay, but so to go a little bit more in depth on two of the other assignments. So first off, I want to talk a little more about the communal writing project. If all goes as planned, I will include that prompt in this discussion thread. I've occasionally had funky things happen in Canvas where those attachments don't show up, or at least don't show up in a very clear space. If you have trouble seeing where it is in this post, it is also posted in that individual assignment and in the class file. So one way, though, you should be able to navigate to the PDF of this prompt, and if you want to read along while I'm talking through it in this video, that may be useful to you as well. So I'm not going to read it verbatim, but I'm just going to kind of scan through the document and hit what I consider to be the kind of the most important points. So the idea with the communal writing project is that we're kind of doing this process where somebody starts a story and then somebody picks up the story, and we keep carrying it through and carrying it through from person to person until we have a full story. So there are going to be 3 separate tracks for this assignment where I'm going to assign you randomly to a track A, B, or C, and then there's due dates laid out across the syllabus of 1A, 2, or the first due date is 1A, 1B, 1C, and that'll be Monday of next week. Then it's 2A, 2B, 2C, and so on and so forth until we've seen through this entire process. So my plan is that tomorrow I will share that schedule, particularly for the people who are going first in each of the tracks, just to give you kind of the maximum time to be able to work on it. Given the nature of the assignment that you're continuing a story someone else started, unless you're the very first one in the track, it's hard to kind of work ahead too much on this. You can start kind of brainstorming loose ideas, but what you do will be based very much on what the writer before you has done and kind of continuing the story. But so to go over some nuts and bolts of this, so each writer is expected to turn in a minimum of 1 full page. So that means it gets to the very bottom of that first page, maybe ideally spilling onto the second page a little bit, just to show you a full 1 page. Maximum of 3 pages. If you happen to spill a tiny bit over, like you're just in the middle of a sentence, you can't quite get there without just wasting tons of time with editing things down. You can go a little bit over 3 pages, but aim for between 1 and 3 pages. And is kind of the long and short of it. This isn't meant to be a super long assignment, and I expect even if that sounds like that's a challenging assignment to you, I expect once you actually start writing, I think most students find it actually is almost harder to stop at that point. So between 1 and 3 pages is what you're looking to do, and you're expected to submit your work by 11 a.m. on the assigned due date for you. So again, staggered due dates. I'll give you the schedule tomorrow. So by 11 a.m. That day, though, you'll submit your work through Canvas, through the assignment folder, and then I will share it with the whole class for them to be able to read and enjoy, hopefully. So again, I hope this will be fun. I hope this will be entertaining for all of us, and then pick up with the next person. When I share those with the class, a big part of the idea that is, we'll all read them, and we'll have some discussion of the work that your peers have generated. I imagine some of you may have more to say about some submissions and others. You don't need to comment on every single one every single time, but try to engage with each other. Be supportive of each other. The main idea of this is not to be critical, like the writing workshop will engage in more fully later on in the session, but rather to be supportive of each other and kind of celebrate what we're doing, because creative writing can be kind of a lonely activity, but it can also be an activity to kind of show your chops, show your creativity, show your imagination, and so to kind of encourage each other in that process. The extent to which we might get a little critical is just in talking about what choices make it easier or harder to continue a story. So for example, if someone writes you into a real corner, why is that challenging? Is that a fun challenge, or is that just like this is hard at this point, right? And just kind of have that process of reflection for each other that you can apply to other work that you do with peers in the future, as well as applying to this very activity and kind of how it carries on, and to your own individual writing too, I'd say, because sometimes we write ourselves into corners, right? And those are things that we can learn to avoid or learn to engage with kind of as appropriate. But okay, so for these stories, so some requirements that are kind of listed in the bullet points here. I want it to be set in the real world. So for the most part, planet Earth, right? The world we know. Although if you wanted to, for example, set it on a space shuttle or set it on the moon or something like that, part of the world that we know and that we could reasonably interact with, that is also okay. And then I'm encouraging you to incorporate speculative elements from pretty early on. So I list, magic, wizards, witches, ghosts, aliens, time travelers. This is really wide open. And I know some of us may have different beliefs about, what is necessarily real or not. And that's up for debate, right? But sort of we're just choosing elements that in general we haven't all agreed are real, or at least haven't agreed on how they work in this world. From there, though, one of the main things I'm challenging folks to do is maintain continuity of the story. So we're not going to have any of that, oh, it was all just a dream. We're going to erase that previous part of the story because it was too hard to grapple with. Honoring the previous writers to go with you and working within the story that they've given you. That's one of the key elements of this activity. So none of that, it was just a daydream or it was just a dream or any of that. Also, we're trying not to get too random, for lack of a better word, right? So I give the example here. If zombies have been written in as a core element of this story, that's fine. That could certainly be how we approach the story. Just having a random alien ship come down to shoot down all the zombies, if that has not been established as a part of this world, that is not kind of an organic part of this story, right? So I want us to be able to have fun with this and kind of be imaginative, but within the limits of not kind of just being random and kind of silly with it, right? I want us to take this seriously as a project that we're all trying to create together. So let's see, what else do I have? I've hit a number of these bullet points here. Okay, so with the exception of the first student on each track, I'm asking you not to introduce any more than 2 new characters or 1 new setting. Again, this is mostly a step towards just not kind of recreating the wheel and kind of erasing previous work and starting a new story midway through, but rather working with what you have, having just 1 new setting and 1 or 2 new characters. That feels like fair game to me. And if you have something very specific in mind that might exceed that, let me know what you're thinking as early as you can. I'm open to being a little flexible on that, but that's going to be the exception rather than the rule. Okay, and otherwise, I want something to happen in each of these segments of the story. So not just kind of rehashing what's already happened, not just kind of killing space to get to a single page, but rather, making sure you're moving the story. So the nature of this is, again, you're writing on a pretty short time scale because most of you are only going to have a couple days to have read the previous one and then think of what you want to write and actually put it on paper and then submit it. So as long as it's clear that you're making the effort, that you're honoring the spirit of the assignment, and you submit your work on time, you can expect to earn your full 10 points for this part of the assignment, or at least very close to like 9 or 9.5 points if I feel like you weren't quite there, but it was clear the effort was there. So rest assured, this should, for lack of a better way of saying it, essentially be sort of an easy A assignment as long as you do it and do it on time. So not something to stress over. So I hope that's clear, but yet in the discussion thread, please feel free to weigh in with questions about that. The other assignment I wanted to spend a little bit of time rehashing here today, because I only really briefly touched on it last time, was these group-led discussion videos, because the first one of those is going to be due next Monday as well, so I realize that's a pretty quick turnaround. So what I'm asking you to do, basically we have 2 novellas that we're reading. The book itself refers to them as short novels. We can have that debate if anyone wants to of what they technically are, but one of them is Aloft and one of them is Rain. They're both by Joe Hill. They're both in the Strange Weather book that you'll start reading very soon for this class. So after we finish discussing a novella, in the next class sessions, I'm going to have these group-led discussions that are posted there. And again, I'll assign students to groups and have the schedule up. I expect tomorrow, so you have a little bit of lead time to start planning things out and get in touch with each other. But so for these, the idea is that you spend about, I listed at 10 to 20 minutes. If they're a little bit short of that, or if they just meet 10 minutes, that's totally fine. To be transparent, I designed this activity, this assignment at first for in-person classes where it's a little bit more natural to just be in front of a room and basically lead a discussion that would last 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, in some cases the whole class period. So here I'm asking you to aim for a video of at least 10 minutes or so. Yeah, if it's a little short, I won't penalize you. If it's only like 5 minutes, you probably will be penalized. But if you get to like 9.5 minutes, I'll probably consider that within the grace period and close enough. But a video, and this can be individual students talking into the camera. This can be showing slides and narrating over them, and kind of anywhere on the spectrum around that. It can be more creative and kind of fun. Up to you how you want to approach it. It doesn't need to be every single student in the group actually appearing or actually speaking in the video. You can distribute that work however you see fit. My main priority is that everyone is contributing to the project. So if you're not taking an active role in actually speaking in the video, my expectation is you were doing more work behind the scenes to actually put together slides or do research or plan out some of the creative elements of it or whatever that might be. But the idea is that you're talking a little bit about some element that you got from this reading, and raising a minimum of 3 questions for the class. So you'll notice, starting with today's video lecture, I'm going to raise some questions about the reading just to kind of spark discussion on the discussion thread. Here I'm turning it over to the group because I'm sure that you have noticed or are interested in things that I wouldn't necessarily think of, right? That's part of why I like these group-led discussions is it gives you an opportunity to kind of take control of the discussion and zero in on things that I might not have, right? So it kind of gives you a little bit more ownership of this. And I often think it's a more interesting part of class because you'll get to know the kinds of questions and kinds of things that I pay attention to over the course of the session. And this will open it up to other things that may be of interest to students. It might be more interesting in some cases. But okay, so with all that square, again, please feel free to ask questions about any of those assignments in the discussion thread below. But now to jump into the reading a little bit for this time. So this was the first chapter from Harry Potter on the Sorcerer's Stone, as it's known in the U.S. It's the Philosopher's Stone in the original British version by J.K. Rowling. And I'll address one quick elephant in the room first. For those of you who have been following it, it's largely happened on Twitter, but I know it's a discussion that's reached beyond that as well. Rowling herself does have some controversy around her right now. She has said some pretty controversial things related specifically to transgendered individuals. I'm sort of, in this case, as I feel is appropriate in a number of cases, actually, separating the art from the artist. I think it's fine to say that what Rowling has said is kind of problematic, and that might even compromise our fanship of her in some cases. That's sort of its own discussion, which if folks want to engage with a little bit, we can, but it was a little bit beside the point for the class's purposes. But regardless, I'm acknowledging that, right? That this isn't sort of someone who I'm necessarily putting on a pedestal as being someone we should aspire to be like in all aspects of her personality. But with that, the main questions I wanted to raise about this first chapter of Harry Potter, again, I expect a number of you, I'm sure, read this in your youth or more recently. Some of you probably have not, right? But at this point in our culture, I think it's impossible not to have any familiarity with Harry Potter, right? Even if you have never read any of the books, never seen any of the movies, never visited the theme parks, I still expect you know the name Harry Potter, have some general sense of what that character looks like, may have heard of Hogwarts and that they're wizards and all of that. But so from reading this first chapter, and some of you already started to address this in your journal responses, which was great, I want to talk about what this beginning does, right? And particularly this element of what feels almost like a cliche here, what fits into a tradition in some ways, versus what feels unique and original to this text. So to give you a little bit of an example, I'm not going to go through a whole list because I want to give you room to come up with your own examples, which I'm sure some of which would overlap with what I would say. But this idea of having an orphan character who is sort of a chosen one, right? That we kind of set that up. That in and of itself feels familiar to me, right? Maybe not being exactly specifically an orphan, but being a child who's kind of an outsider and kind of on their own, and them having something special about them and turning out to have more potential than it seems in the beginning. All of that feels like sort of a trope, right? Of kind of all sorts of storytelling genres, including fantasy and science fiction. So what other familiar elements do we recognize here? And then on the flip side of it, what feels genuinely unique here? Right? What feels new and original and maybe contributed to the success of the Harry Potter franchise to follow. And then all of this I want to just kind of to add up to a little discussion of why these pieces work, this combination of cliches and more unique original elements. Why does it succeed, at least to the extent that we feel that it does succeed, because maybe not everyone feels that it does. But why did Rowling write it this way? Why did it resonate with a large audience? Because even if you don't like it, you can't deny that it's popular, right? That it's become a huge part of our pop culture, that most people, I would say, of our culture are at least somewhat familiar with this thing. Why has it succeeded, and what does that mixture of kind of cliche and again more original thinking kind of do to support that? Beyond that, just kind of in thinking about beginnings, I wanted to ask, what kind of promises seem to be set up here? What does a chapter kind of make us anticipate for the rest of the book? Why would it make us want to keep reading? Why is this chapter appealing? How is it interesting? Why is it captivating? How is this sort of the springboard for such a successful series of books that then spawned all of this other media? So I hope that's plenty to think about. Again, in the discussion threads, please don't feel obligated to answer every single one of these questions, and feel free to break up your responses into separate pieces. If you want to address, first your questions about the assignments, and then, answer some of these questions about that first chapter from Harry Potter. That is absolutely fair game. In fact, that's probably a cleaner way of managing the discussion. Just as, if you raised your hand in a physical class, you wouldn't go off and talk for, 10 minutes straight about all of your questions and then all of your observations from the first chapter. You would split those up in response to my questions and in response to each other. That's more the kind of discussion I would like, so we're less segmented off into individual people's comments that don't really link together, and more of a discussion with each other, right? Read what each other have to say and respond to those points. If you don't have anything to respond to but do want to respond to this video, by all means, start a new comment thread there for that purpose. But I think you'll see what I mean as we get going, and I'll be weighing in, of course, as well to kind of help steer things and ask some follow-up questions as well. But all right, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow.